Let's go, Ape. Hello there, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name still Paul Mount. I'm doing a different, unplanned retro movie review this evening. It's a film that wasn't on my radar to rewatch particularly until I read this book. This is book, The Planet of the Apes, The Complete History. I did an unboxing of this last week with a few other bits and pieces that I'd recently purchased. And I've read the book. I've finished it fairly quickly. It's a really interesting, capsule review of the book. Really interesting look at a phenomenon. The Planet of the Apes phenomenon from the Pierre Boulle book in the early 60s through the film series of the 60s and 70s, the TV series, the spin-offs, the comics, and of course the spectacular 21st Reinvention trilogy films. And of course Tim Burton's 2001 reimagining of Planet of the Apes. Which is not well regarded. It was a hit film, but there wasn't a sequel. It sort of came and went. And it's an interesting anomaly. It's an interesting film. And I thought, especially having read the comments in here, Sean Egan, who writes this book, is quite, not exactly outspoken, but he's quite happy to give his opinion on certain parts of ape history. And he voiced the opinion that Tim Burton's 2001 reimagining of Planet of the Apes is an underrated film. Now, I've just sort of accepted the general perception and the general view is that it's rubbish. And I remember seeing it back at the time and being disappointed by it because I am a big fan of the whole Planet of the Apes franchise and felt that it didn't stand up alongside the other Apes films. But having read the book and having read about the making of the film and various issues around it, I decided I wanted to have a rewatch, so that's why I'm doing a retro movie review of it tonight. What's interesting about the film is that it is quite good. As a film in itself, it's a huge, spectacular science fiction film, but what it isn't is two things. It's not a Tim Burton film, not in the accepted sense. Tim Burton is a great auteur, and he makes these weird, wild, fanciful films. I'm thinking of things like Mars Attacks and Edward Scissorhands and those sort of imperial phase Tim Burton films that were very, very much Tim Burton films, even things like Sleepy Hollow more recently. I say more recently, even that was about 20 years ago. He has a very distinctive visual look. And this, whilst it looks great and looks big and spectacular, it doesn't really look like a Tim Burton film. It looks like a big, spectacular science fiction film. And I think the problem is that the material didn't give him the chance to put the Tim Burton stamp on it. Here she is. Apologies, she has to be here. Didn't give him the chance to make it a Tim Burton film. So it does feel a little bit generic blockbuster science fiction film. I do apologise. What can I do? So it isn't a Tim Burton film. And it also isn't a Planet of the Apes film. Because it isn't part of the lineage and the tapestry of the Planet of the Apes series. I love the Planet of the Apes series and I always have. I remember watching them back in the 60s and 70s. I don't think I saw the first two at the cinema. I would have caught up with them later. But I do remember quite clearly seeing Escape from the Planet of the Apes in 1971. And the other ones, the ones that came afterwards. And then I read the books and I've seen the TV series, which was sort of cancelled very early on. There's a very interesting piece about that actually in this book. But I love the fact that it is the first science fiction film series that attempted its own internal continuity and to keep true to itself. Rosie, you're a pest. It is the first science fiction film. It's certainly out Star Wars is Star Wars because it presented a story across a series of films, a developing chronology and continuity, which is quite difficult to reconcile. And it's always the way when you have something that has its own continuity. It does get harder to reconcile it all and make all the pieces fit as the story and the canon develops. It's one of the big problems, of course, with things like Doctor Who, where Doctor Who fans are trying to make sense now of things that happened in 1964 and try and fit it all into what we know about the series and the character. And it's hard to do because different creative minds come along and have their own ideas, their own visions, and they take things in different directions. And that's what happened with Planet of the Apes. This film, however, and I mentioned the word earlier on, and I went like that, it is a reimagining. I think it's a word that Tim Burton himself used to say that it wasn't a remake, it wasn't a sequel, it was a reimagining. It was the idea, but a different story. And I think watching the film again tonight just reminded me of that it is called Planet of the Apes, but it's got nothing to do with that 5-film franchise for the 60s and 70s. It's got nothing to do with the TV series, the comics. It's got nothing to do with the successful reboot which came along 10 years or so later. So you look at it as a standalone film. And on that basis, and as I said, bearing in mind that it doesn't feel very Tim Burton, I think it's not bad. It stars Mark Wahlberg, Helena Bonham Carter, Tim Roth, Michael Clark Duncan, Paul Giamatti, with a little cameo uncredited by Charlton Heston, of course, who was the legendary tailor in the original Planet of the Apes film. And it's set in 2029, so just around the corner, where a group of scientists are working aboard a NASA space station called the Oberon, where they're doing experiments using chimpanzees to test out sort of space flight and the effects of space travel and so on. And there's one particular chimpanzee that Mark Wahlberg, who plays Leo Davis, and he's quite fond of this chimpanzee. It's called Pericles, and he gets sent off on missions. And they send him out into an electromagnetic storm that's approaching, and Pericles disappears. Despite orders forbidding it, Leo gets into his own space pod and follows Pericles. He too disappears, and he finds himself on a planet which I think is called Ashlar, where apes have become the dominant species and humankind is treated like slaves. So far, so Planet of the Apes. It's that sort of idea. But the difference here, of course, is that it actually is an alien planet. In the original Planet of the Apes, spoiler, we're on Earth. But this is very much an alien planet. The twist here, and it's quite a good twist. Obviously, Leo, Mark Wahlberg. I quite like Mark Wahlberg. There's something, quite pleasant about him as an actor. He's currently in Uncharted, which I reviewed fairly recently. I think he's a solid screen presence. Not the most charismatic of actors, but he carries a film. Anyway, as Leo Davis, and he wants to find a way to get back to Earth if he can. His capsule crashes in a sort of nod to the original film. It crashes in sort of a muddy sort of pond area. He goes back to the ship and retrieves some equipment. He has liberated some humans from slavery, caused a bit of a stir in ape society because he's discovered, as I said, that apes are the dominant species, and he's caused a bit of a stir. The twist in the film, I think, is quite clever in that he discovers that he's been catapulted forward thousands of years in time, but so has the Oberon. The Oberon has actually crashed on the planet. The apes that were on the planet escaped from the ship and eventually created the community that exists on the planet. And I think that's quite a nice twist in and of itself, and I think it works very well. It all builds up to this huge climactic battle where the guerrilla army is trying to stop him because he's basically caused dissent amongst the ape community. And he eventually finds his way back home to one of the most puzzling and perplexing twist endings in cinema history, I think. I won't say any more about that. I won't say any more about the mechanics of the film. But I sort of enjoyed it. I think the first 20-25 minutes didn't particularly engage me. I think because the visual look of the ape community, it's quite sort of dark and it's very, very soundstagey with these sort of tree houses that it's quite sort of overbearing. When it goes outside into the sort of deserty areas, it reminded me of the original Planet of the Apes films. That that thing of sort of natural light and natural realistic landscapes makes it a bit more interesting. So it's an interesting film. Becomes an interesting film anyway after a fairly slow start. I sort of enjoyed it. I mean, but I think watching it, you have to sort of divorce yourself from Planet of the Apes or the other iterations of Planet of the Apes, because the whole series, the original films and the more recent films, they do sort of lock together and they have a sort of continuity and they do have a relationship to one another. This doesn't. This is a thing on its own. It's its own thing. And I think if you go into it with that mindset, I think you'll get something from it. But I think that if you want something that has connective tissue to any other version of Planet of the Apes, you're going to find it frustrating. And I think that might have been the problem at the time. People wanted to be reminded of the series that they'd enjoyed, but didn't get it from this film, because it was never intended to be that. It was a different look at that idea. On the plus side, the special effects are fantastic. Even now, and I always say this, I did a retro review of The Day After Tomorrow last week, and that still holds up. I mean, I watched that on the cinema screen, it looks great. I watched Planet of the Apes on the cinema screen, it looked damn good. So as much as visual effects have improved over the last 20 years, that it looked good, looked really good. There was some really big action scenes. The space special effects are really good. And special kudos to Rick Baker's prosthetic makeup of the apes, because obviously in the more recent films, the apes are all done by motion capture. So you don't get any prosthetics. You don't get much of the way of makeup because it's all done by motion capture, which is a brilliant art form in itself. But the prosthetics here are fantastic. It's done in such a way. If you look at John Chambers' original makeup for the original films, that's quite primitive by today's standards. But these apes look really good because the makeup works in such a way that the actors can express themselves not just through their eyes, but with their mouths and their whole faces. The masks work in such a way that allows them to emote and allows them to project. And it's really very good. So I did enjoy it, actually. I'd say it was a bit slow to get going. I found the first 20-25 minutes, once he was on the planet, a little bit muddy and visually unappealing. But once the story broadened out, and I did like the twist, because I think that was a sort of a nod to the original sort of Planet of the Apes film, which had a twist. And I think that sort of thing was expected. But as I said, I think the problem for it is that it's quite bland in terms of the way it's directed. It hasn't got that flair that Tim Burton always has. It didn't give him the opportunity to do that sort of slightly sideways cinematography, if you like, to present weird worlds and weird people, because it was a science fiction story that didn't give him that ability. And I think that's possibly why he found it a frustrating experience. I recall at the time when the film came out, he was asked if he would do a sequel, and his response was, I'd rather jump out of a window. I think he just found it creatively frustrating. And that comes across on the screen because it is very by the numbers. It's a sort of a story told by the numbers, by the book. And it doesn't give him a chance to do what he does best, which I think is probably why he found it frustrating. But beyond that, there were some really good performances. I said I like Mark Wahlberg. Helena Bonham Carter is very good, hidden under acres of makeup. The brilliant and much missed Michael Clark Duncan is one of the gorillas. Tim Roth is brilliant as the villain of the piece, really, General Thade, this gorilla, angry gorilla who's on the warpath. Paul Giamatti is the sort of comic relief, if you like. But there is something missing to make it a great film. And I think it probably is that sort of lack of connection to the original Planet of the Apes. But as I said, you have to go into this realizing it's a reimagining of the idea of the name of the Planet of the Apes, and it doesn't attempt to be a part of the previous series. Whether it was an attempt to start a new franchise, I mean, as I said, there wasn't a sequel, although it was quite successful in the box office. I think it was one of the top 10 films of the year. But Fox, and I think it's something that this book points out, that Fox have never really understood Planet of the Apes and never really known what to do with it, which is why they were so reluctant to sort of push it. But that's a whole other issue. I would go back to this book. I really recommend this if you're interested in the development of a film series and the pitfalls and perils and pitfalls of making a film series. It's really a great book. But anyway, to wrap up, because I'm rambling a bit now, I quite enjoyed Planet of the Apes, Tim Burton's version. As I said, with the proviso that it doesn't feel Tim Burton, and obviously it just isn't Planet of the Apes as we know it. because of that, and because I was quite surprised by it, I'd expected to dislike it. Oh, I must mention Danny Elfman's theme music, which I think is terrific. It's got that sort of clattering tribal feel to it, which is very atmospheric and quite sort of not threatening, but quite oppressive and quite sort of distinctive. Anyway, yeah, I would give this. I think I would give this 6 out of 10. Actually, 6 out of 10. I didn't think I would. I was expecting a 3 or a 4 at best, but certainly, the last 45 minutes, 50 minutes really gripped me, and good action scenes, and I did like the twist. The ending is, scholars have tried to work out what the ending actually means. I think he was trying to set up a sequel, possibly, which would have explained what that ending was, but that was never to be. So that's Planet of the Apes, which I watched because of the Planet of the Apes book. Once again, if you're interested in the history of the apes, get this book. It's well worth getting. It's from Applause Theatre and Cinema Books by Sean Egan. Planet of the Apes, The Complete History, which I finished reading today. Terrific book. And it's led me down the path of watching this film again, which I probably wouldn't have done. Right, I hope you enjoyed this rather unstructured, wandering review, and I do apologise for Rosie's guest appearance. She's gone quiet now. I'll see you soon for another video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that usual stuff. And until I see you next time. What is it to say again? Yeah, keep taking the stuff.